The journey has been long and difficult, but the final revelation is finally within your reach at the end of the road. Stay with us as we piece together the last bit of the puzzle and reveal the truth. Hit subscribe now and witness the most important ending. By the time my son's wife walked into that bank branch on a Tuesday morning in October, the account she thought she was about to drain had already been closed for 11 days. I want you to picture that moment. Picture her standing at the counter, sliding across a piece of paper she'd spent weeks preparing, wearing that confident smile she always wore when she thought she'd already won. And then picture the teller's face. Polite, careful. The way people look when they have to deliver news they didn't expect to be delivering that morning. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later, in detail. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. What I felt was something quieter, something closer to grief, because none of it had to happen this way. My name is Robert. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a senior accountant for a mid-sized construction firm in Hamilton, Ontario. I know numbers. I know contracts. I know exactly what language means in a legal document. And I know exactly what it means when someone asks you to sign something and then immediately changes the subject before you've had a chance to read it. My wife, Margaret, passed away 2 years before all of this. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors told us was merciful given the nature of the disease, and which felt like anything but. We had been married for 41 years. She used to say I was impossible to live with because I never stopped calculating things, never stopped adding up columns in my head even at the dinner table. She said it with a smile every single time. After she was gone, the house in Hamilton felt like a building I had accidentally wandered into. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a garden she had kept every summer, which I did not know how to maintain, a kitchen that still had her handwriting on the labels of the spice jars. My son Daniel called me in January of that year. He said he and his wife, Nicole, had been talking. He said they were worried about me being alone. He said the house was too big for one person, that the winters in Hamilton were brutal, that it would be easier for everyone if they came to stay with me for a while. Help with the house. Keep me company. He made it sound like a kindness. I said yes, because I missed my son. That's the honest truth of it. I said yes, because I thought it meant something that he'd called, that he'd offered, that he seemed to want to be present in a way he hadn't been in the years before Margaret died. I told myself that grief does strange things to families. I told myself this was us finding our way back to each other. They arrived on a Saturday in February with a moving truck that was considerably larger than I had expected for what Daniel had described as a few things. Nicole was pleasant in those first weeks, efficient. She reorganized the kitchen almost immediately, which I noticed but didn't comment on. She had strong opinions about where things should go and a way of implementing those opinions before you'd finished processing that she'd had them. Daniel seemed tired in a way I couldn't quite name, shorter than I remembered, less likely to meet my eyes across the dinner table. By April, I had started to feel like a guest in my own home, not because anyone said anything directly. That wasn't how Nicole operated. It was subtler than that. It was the way a conversation would stop when I entered a room. The way certain doors were now kept closed. The way Nicole began referring to our space and your space in a way that had never been discussed, but seemed to be fully formed as a concept in her mind. I am not a man who looks for conflict. I never have been. Margaret used to say I would rather do 1,000 calculations than have one difficult conversation. And she wasn't wrong. So I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself this was an adjustment period. I went to bed at 10 and read my books and tried to stay out of the way. In early June, I came downstairs at 11:30 at night because I couldn't sleep and wanted a glass of water. The kitchen light was on. I could hear voices. I stopped in the hallway the way you do when you realize someone is having a conversation that has weight to it, and something in you knows before your brain catches up that you should listen. Nicole's voice was low and precise. She was not whispering exactly, but she was speaking in the controlled way she used when she had already made a decision and was presenting it as a discussion. She said that at his age, with the amount of assets involved, it was irresponsible not to have a proper power of attorney in place. She said she'd spoken to someone. She said it was straightforward. She said Daniel needed to be listed as the primary decision maker for financial and medical matters, and that the sooner it was done, the better for everyone, including me. Daniel said something I couldn't make out. Nicole said that I wouldn't fight it. She said I trusted Daniel completely. She said, and this is the part that I have turned over in my mind many times, since she said that by the time I understood what I'd signed, it wouldn't matter. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time. The floor was cold through my socks. The refrigerator made a small sound, and then I walked back upstairs very quietly, lay down on top of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I did not sleep that night. I want to be clear about something. In that moment, lying there in the dark, I was not angry. I know that might be hard to believe, but what I felt was something more fundamental than anger. I felt the ground shift beneath a version of my life I thought I understood. I felt the specific pain of realizing that the concern that had brought my son to my door in February had not been concern at all. And underneath all of that, I felt something click into place. Something that had spent 41 years working with numbers and contracts and the precise language of agreements. I started paying attention differently. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched. I listened. I was in my own home, moving through my own rooms, and I let them both forget that I was there. Nicole was not careless, but she was confident in a way that made her slightly less careful than she might otherwise have been. She had decided I was a certain kind of man, gentle, a little foggy, grateful for the company. And once she'd decided that, she stopped looking too closely. I found out 2 things in those 3 weeks. The first was that Nicole had already been in contact with a financial planner, not for advice on my behalf, but about the liquidity of my assets and the process for transferring signing authority on accounts. I found a printed email she had left in the recycling bin in the home office, which she had begun using as her own. The second thing I found out was that Daniel knew more than he'd been pretending not to know. That second one was harder. I called a lawyer, not someone local, because I didn't want the conversation getting back to anyone. I drove to Burlington on a Thursday afternoon, told Daniel I had a doctor's appointment, and sat down with a woman named Patricia, who had been doing estate law for 22 years. I told her everything. I laid it out the way I'd been trained to lay things out in order, with specifics, without editorializing. She listened with her hands folded on the desk, and when I finished, she said, "You came here just in time." She explained what Nicole had likely found out, that if a power of attorney for property was signed and witnessed correctly, and if I were later assessed as having diminished capacity, or even if I simply signed things I didn't fully read, the document would give Daniel extraordinary control over my finances, my pension, my investments, the house, which was worth considerably more than it had been when Margaret and I bought it in 1991, because Hamilton had changed around us while we weren't paying attention to the market. Patricia and I met 4 times over the following 6 weeks. I did not tell Daniel or Nicole about any of it. I drove to Burlington on days when I said I was visiting a friend from the old firm, which was partially true because I did stop for coffee with Jim Kowalski on the way back twice, and Jim is the kind of man who doesn't ask questions when you seem distracted. We did 3 things. First, we updated my will. It had not been updated since before Margaret's illness, and it needed work regardless of the circumstances. Second, we established a new structure for my investments, moving the primary accounts to a different institution and adding specific legal protections that would require my direct involvement in any transaction above a nominal amount. Third, we prepared documentation. This is the part that Patricia and I spent the most time on. I had kept the email from the recycling bin. I had also, beginning in late June, started keeping notes, dates, times, specific things said. I am an accountant. I have been keeping detailed records my entire professional life. The notes were thorough. I also, and I want to be straightforward about this because I think it matters, purchased a small digital recorder. A simple one, the kind you can find at any electronics store. I kept it in the breast pocket of my cardigan when I was home. I did not record every conversation. I recorded the ones that felt significant. In Ontario, it is legal to record a conversation in which you are a participant, and I had spoken with Patricia about this specifically before I did it. I have 4 recordings. The clearest one is from a Sunday afternoon in July, when Daniel and Nicole did not know I was in the sunroom at the back of the house. The window was open because it was warm, I could hear them on the back patio. Nicole was laying out a timeline. She used the words before he figures it out. She used the words once we have signing authority. She said that once the power of attorney was in place, they could manage the house situation. I sat very still in the sunroom with the recorder in my pocket and listened to my son say nothing that contradicted any of it. In August, Nicole told me over dinner that she'd found a wonderful lawyer, very straightforward, nothing to worry about, who could help me get some things organized. She said it would be a good idea to have someone managing things in case something happened. She smiled when she said it. I said that sounded very thoughtful of her. I said I would think about it. She was satisfied with that answer. I could see it in the way she reached for her wine glass. I had one more meeting with Patricia in September. We went through everything, and she told me that what I had was solid. She said we had a clear record and that if anything were to escalate, I was well protected. She also said something I've thought about since. She said, "You could have reacted much earlier, and it would have been messier. You were patient. That matters." I drove home from Burlington that last time, and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The leaves on the oak tree at the front of the property were just starting to turn. Margaret had loved that tree. She'd been furious when the city wanted to trim it back years ago, and had written a letter to the counselor's office that was 3 pages long. I went inside and made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what I was going to do next. I decided to do it properly. I chose a Wednesday evening in late September. Daniel was home, which mattered to me. I wanted him in the room. I had called my brother-in-law, Margaret's brother Ted, who lives in Oakville and has known me for 40 years, and asked him to come for dinner. I told him I needed a witness to something, and that I would explain when he arrived. Ted is a quiet man who spent his career as a civil engineer and does not rattle easily. He came. I had also called a woman named Sandra, who had been Margaret's closest friend for the last 15 years of her life, and who had continued to check in on me in the months since. Sandra came as well. She sat at the table with her hands around a mug of tea, and looked at me with the expression of someone who had suspected something was wrong for some time. Nicole came downstairs, saw Ted and Sandra at the table, and her smile shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. I asked everyone to sit down. I had prepared a folder. It was a habit from 31 years of professional life. When you are presenting information, you present it clearly, in order, with documentation. The folder had 5 sections. The first was the original email from the recycling bin, now in a sealed sleeve. The second was my notes, dated and signed. The third was a printed transcript of portions of the audio recording, with the date and time marked. The fourth was a letter from Patricia's firm, outlining the legal protections now in place on my accounts and estate. The fifth was a single-page document. I had prepared myself a summary of what had been planned, and what had instead occurred. I slid a copy across the table to Daniel first. I want to tell you what his face looked like when he started reading, but I find I don't have the heart to describe it in detail. He is still my son. Whatever else is true, he is still my son, and watching someone you love understand what they've done is not a simple feeling. I am not sure there is a word for it. Nicole's reaction was different. Nicole went very still, and her eyes moved quickly across the page in a way that told me she was assessing rather than absorbing. She looked up at me and said, "My name. Just my name," as if she thought the right tone might still change something. I told her it was too late for that. I told them both calmly, because I had decided I would be calm what I had found, what I had done about it, and what the current state of affairs was. I told them that my accounts were no longer accessible to anyone but me, and that my will had been updated by a lawyer in Burlington and was now in a secure location. I told them that Patricia's firm was aware of the full situation, and that a copy of everything in the folder had been left with Ted as a secondary holder. I told them that the recordings had been reviewed by legal counsel. Nicole said that I was misunderstanding the situation. She said the power of attorney had been meant to protect me. She said I was being unfair. Sandra put her mug down on the table with a small, deliberate sound, and said, "I think you should stop talking now." Nicole stopped talking. Daniel had not said anything since he'd started reading. He put the papers down on the table very carefully and looked at me and said he was sorry. He said it the way people say things when they know the words are not adequate but they don't have anything else. I looked at my son, this person I had held as an infant in the Juravinsky Hospital on a February morning 37 years ago. This person Margaret had read to sleep every night for years, This person I had driven to hockey at 5:30 in the morning through Hamilton winters, without once complaining about it, and I said that I knew he was. And then I told them both that I needed them to be out of the house by the end of October. Nicole started to say something about their rights as occupants. I had asked Patricia about this specifically. I told Nicole that she was welcome to consult her own lawyer, and that Patricia's firm had already prepared for that possibility. There was nothing in the arrangement of their staying with me that constituted a tenancy. They had no legal right to remain. Ted drove them to the lawyer's office the following week to review the documents Patricia's firm had sent over. There was no disputing any of it. Everything was in order, because I am the kind of man who makes sure everything is in order. They were out by October 28th. I watched their car reverse out of the driveway on a cool Tuesday morning. I was standing at the front window with a cup of coffee. The oak tree had lost most of its leaves by then, and they were collected in drifts along the side of the property. I stood there for a while after the car was gone. The house was very quiet. I called Ted that afternoon. He asked me how I was doing, and I said I wasn't entirely sure. He said that was a reasonable answer. He asked if I wanted to come for dinner on Sunday, and I said yes, that I would bring the wine. Patricia called me the following week. She said that Nicole had contacted her office inquiring about the recordings and whether they were admissible, and that her office had referred Nicole to the relevant section of the Ontario Evidence Act. She said she didn't anticipate any further action. She said, in the careful language that good lawyers use, that the circumstances had been thoroughly documented, and that my position was unambiguous. I thanked her. She said she was glad it had worked out. She said she'd had clients in similar situations who hadn't caught it in time, and that I should feel good about the fact that I had. I thanked her again and said I would send a card at Christmas. I have been back on my own in the house since November. Margaret's garden is a mess because I still don't entirely know what I'm doing out there, but Sandra came over in the spring, and we spent a Saturday afternoon in it together, and she showed me which things had survived the winter and which needed to be replaced. I planted 3 new rose bushes along the back fence. They took. Jim Kowalski retired in January, and we have started playing cribbage on Thursday afternoons at his place in Dundas. He knows something significant happened in my life last year, and he has not asked about it, which is exactly why we have been friends for 23 years. Daniel called me in December. It was a short call. He did not ask to come back. He said he hoped I was doing well. I said I was. He said he was in Guelph, that he and Nicole were renting an apartment, that things were complicated between them. I did not say what I thought about that. I said I was glad he'd called. I said the door was not closed, not wide open, but not closed. He said okay. He said he'd call again in the new year. He did. It was a short call again. We talked about the Leafs, which is something we have always been able to talk about, regardless of everything else. I do not know where things go from here between my son and me. I am 68 years old, and I have lived long enough to know that some damage heals slowly, and some doesn't heal at all, and that you cannot always predict which is which. What I know is that I am still here, still in my house, still with Margaret's handwriting on the spice jar labels, which I have not changed and do not intend to. There is a version of this story where I don't go downstairs for that glass of water on that particular June night, where I sleep through, where I sign whatever is put in front of me because I am tired and grieving, and I trust my son. I have thought about that version of this story a number of times. It does not do any good to think about it, but I think about it anyway, because that is what it means to be human. What I will tell you is this. If you are in a situation where something feels wrong, pay attention to that feeling. Not every person your age who asks you a careful question about your finances is trying to protect you. Trust your own judgment, even when it is inconvenient. And find a good lawyer, not someone referred to you by the person you are worried about, but someone you find yourself, someone whose only job is to look out for you. I did not set out to outmaneuver my son and his wife. I set out to protect what Margaret and I built together over 41 years, because she is not here to protect it, and because she would have wanted me to. That is the only way I know how to think about it. The oak tree out front is leafing out again now. It does that every year, regardless of anything else, which I find, on balance, comforting.